there's something you really need to understand about the Greek society. Even though written language already existed back then, it was a spoken language that dominated absolutely everything in ancient Greece. Right? Purely storytelling, literature, all of it was for a very long time happening orally. A lot of those ancient stories were told from generation to generation. And when Homer wrote the Iliad or the Odyssey, sure, that was a written text, but almost no one was reading it. There were just select few people who read that, you know. It was meant to be performed, and it was written in such a way that allowed it for performance on the stage. Theaters were super popular in ancient Greece. People would rather watch those stories than read them. Well, that is the case for several different reasons. So we have this idea of the past that a lot of people didn't know how to read. Well, the truth is, a lot of people in ancient Greece knew how to read, but also you have to keep in mind that books, or rather scrolls, were very expensive at the time. Not everyone could afford books. It was usually elites who had books at their homes, you know. And you know, the oral retelling of the stories was much more easily available because, you know, everyone could more or less participate in that. And theaters, you could think that those were accessible only to the elites, but that wasn't always the case. Again, in Athens, Pericles actually came up with the idea of a discount for theater attendance, right? So the poor people of Athens could actually attend and watch those plays live, being played on the stage. And I think, you know, in many cases, people want to see the live action stuff rather than reading books. And that was the case with the ancient Greek culture. So even long after written Greek existed, it wasn't the most popular way of communicating either storytelling, information, or ideas. And you know, even looking at the work of Plato, you know, when Plato wrote the Socratic dialogues, right, where you have Socrates as the main character interacting with a specific person throughout the text, throughout the dialogue, usually engaging in a conversation of epistemological or ethical nature. And we have to keep in mind that the Socrates in this text is sort of a fictive character based on the real Socrates, right? Because we don't really have access to anything Socrates wrote, because as far as we are aware, he never wrote anything. And that tells you everything you need to know about, you know, Greeks' thought of the written language. And even those Platonic dialogues or Socratic dialogues, the way they were written so that they could be performed on the stage. No different from Homer's plays like Iliad or Odyssey. You know, comedy originated in Greece. Everything was happening on the stage. Greeks loved theater. And well, as far as the exchange of information and ideas was concerned, sure, people were writing books. But most of that was not happening through that written text. Most of that communication of information and idea was happening at symposiums, at the agora, at the gymnasium. That's how people communicated ideas, or speaking and listening, more than reading or writing. And after that, for a very long time, that was no longer the main way of communicating ideas throughout history. The written language took completely over after that. I mean, sure, people still communicated with each other orally, but it wasn't on the same level as what we've seen in ancient Greece. It's a cultural thing, but it was also an intellectual development that just made books so much more popular. And we are kind of going backwards, or I'm not willing to call it backwards, because backwards usually means worse. And I don't think what we're seeing right now is necessarily worse. It's just different. People are reading less. You know, people are reading much less than they used to. And well, there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, you could say people have short attention span. And as interesting, if you think about like what TikTok and like this short video format does to your brain, right? Well, there you are, not paying attention, right? Your attention span is so short. If the video doesn't engage you in the first 5 seconds, like, boring, swipe, boring, swipe, oh, that's funny, next, boom, boom, next, haha, funny, funny, oh, that's cool. This is like how TikTok works, right?
That's how Mafia works.
And the question is, how exactly does that affect kids at school? How will they be able to read longer texts if their attention span is this bad, right? Well, I like to think of it from a different perspective as well, because I think everything is nuanced, you know? And there's some truth to what I said. There's some truth to what I said, but, and it's a big but. You have to consider that we are bombarded with so much more stuff than ever before in history. Our brains are constantly stimulated, right? We have information and entertainment just flowing through our brains constantly. You know, entering here, exiting here, and so on and so on. I think the fact that we have shorter attention span, if we do, because that is not a certain either, it would make perfect sense, because your brain is constantly on, and when there's so much of that, your attention requires to be selective in that sense. You cannot pay absolute undying attention to absolutely everything around you, because that will drive you crazy. We have selective attention span, and I think it is required to survive in the sort of society we exist in right now. And in that sense, you know, this modern society is very, very different from ancient Greece, but there are some similarities as well. We are moving away from written language, and we are moving more towards spoken language. People might be reading less, but then again, you know, as far as fiction is concerned, there are any new books that I think would be good. Like, I only read classics, and I'm fed up with fiction. I don't read fiction anymore because there's just nothing interesting out there. But you know, at the same time, people are watching very long podcast episodes or videos that last 1 hour, 2, 3, and a person is able to just sit down and watch all of it. Well, what exactly does that say about our attention span? Well, perhaps it's not as bad as people like to think. I think the best explanation of that is what is happening now is exactly what's happening in ancient Greece. We'd rather see and hear than read. And well, it started with the films, you know, the moving picture, or the movie, that's how you Americans call it. I don't like that term, to be honest. And I think people always had the need to see rather than read. Even when you're reading a book, it's like a film of sorts is playing in your head, right? And now you can watch it on a big screen, or a small screen, or a tiny screen. But also the way we communicate and exchange ideas and information is mostly happening orally, rather than in a written form. People watch the news, less people read the news. More people listen to podcasts than they listen to books. Audiobooks are becoming more popular. People rather listen to books than read them. I think it's sort of a cultural thing, right? But it's also technology that allowed us to get here when we went like full circle. You know, we went full circle. As far as technology is concerned, you know, films played a big role there. And the invention of TV, the computer and internet and so on. Internet plays a big role here. Like almost all of the global communication happening right now is happening on the internet. I mean, even what we're doing here right now is internet communication of ideas. I'm giving you my ideas through the screen right now, then I'm reading yours in the comment. But is it really communication, or is it an illusion of communication? Can you actually fully communicate with a person that way? Or are we communicating with an extension of a person? So that is very different. That is very different, but still, it is technology that allowed us to go back to mostly oral communications. Because, back in the day, oral communication couldn't really reach very far. And well, if your entire world is just Athens or the Greek world, yeah, sure, it works, right? You communicate with all of your philosopher buddies at the symposium and the agora and the gymnasium, but, well, you won't reach very far. Like, if that communication was limited only to the symposium and it didn't exist for the written language, it wouldn't survive very long, right? And that's why the written language was so important, to preserve the ideas and to get the ideas out there. And right now, through the technology, through technological evolution, we are all connected in that sense. So why should we be using written language to communicate our ideas when we can communicate them orally? That's what I'm doing right now. But yet, I'm still writing a book. Is it pointless to write a book in the 21st century? I don't think so. I don't think the written language is completely dead, and I don't think it will be for a long time. But it will no longer take the center stage, and I think that's okay. I think it's a natural progress of things.